This episode was chosen by patrons of the Morbid Curiosity podcast on Patreon. If you'd like to suggest a topic, you can do so on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast, on Twitter at Morbid Podcast, and on our website www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. If you'd like to become a patron of the MCP, go to bit.ly/morbidpatron. That's bit.ly/morbidpatron, and you can support us for as little as $1 an episode. That dollar goes a long way, and we're eternally grateful for that support. Thank you. This episode contains some graphic descriptions of destruction and death by volcanic eruption of both adults and children. If that's not something you want to hear about, this may be a good episode to skip. Also, I'm not trained in geology or volcanology, so if I get something wrong, please let me know so I can correct my mistakes. Thank you. Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so the mysterious and unsolved. Interest in these disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped hundreds of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast. Imagine feeling tremors beneath your feet, then looking up at the mountain behind your home and seeing a cloud of smoke spewing forth from its peak. It begins to rain hot ash and pumice, volcanic rock, and continues for so long you must flee your house or become trapped inside as the ash builds up like snow. It's so heavy it collapses rooftops, and you must pull your clothing up over your face just to breathe. Imagine the air is so full of ash that you need a lantern to see, even though it's daylight. Then imagine you hear a roaring louder than any thunder. You begin to run, but you already know you won't escape the black, hot surge of cloud that's moving down the mountain faster than you can consciously comprehend. You'd be confused, panicked, but most of all, terrified. This is likely what the people of Pompeii saw and felt during their last hours before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried the city in the year 79 CE. The entire city, as well as another, Herculaneum, and two smaller settlements, Stabiae and Oplantis, were buried. As the years passed, the existence of Pompeii was forgotten. Even the locals, who had attempted to salvage marble and other goods soon after the eruption, forgot what the scatter of ruins on the southern coast of the Bay of Naples had once been. Then, in 1738, while digging foundations for a new summer palace for Charles of Bourbon, the King of Naples, the remains of Herculaneum were discovered. The king was very interested in the objects found there, as displaying antiquities was thought to reinforce political and cultural prestige at the time. In 1748, the remains of Pompeii were noted, and excavations in the form of treasure hunting began. Pompeii has been under excavation ever since. The name was finally discovered in 1763 by Carl Jacob, a Swiss architect who directed the first scientific exploration of the city. Scientific, in this case, means for the pursuit of knowledge, not treasure. The next bout of scientific excavations occurred following the unification of Italy in 1861, when Giuseppe Fiorelli became director of the site. He directed systematic excavations that moved along the principal streets of the city, keeping detailed records as he went. It was Fiorelli who created the iconic plaster casts of the victims of the eruption from voids in the solidified ash. I'll explain more about how this works after the break. From 1924 to 1961, Amadeo Maiuri oversaw excavations and defined the perimeter of the city. Unfortunately, World War II occurred during this time, and Pompeii was hit by an Allied air raid in 1943, in which about 160 bombs were dropped on the city. 96 unexploded bombs have been found and deactivated over the course of the excavations. In recent years, excavations at Pompeii have halted in favor of maintenance and restoration for the already excavated parts of the city. Due to water damage, tourist activity, earthquakes, and subsequent eruptions of Mount Vesuvius, the ruins of Pompeii are rapidly deteriorating. The Great Pompeii Project, which began in 2012 and is currently overseen by Massimo Ossana, a professor of classical archaeology at the University of Naples, uses the latest technology to preserve and maintain the unique site and all the information it still holds about this first-century Roman town. Small excavations finally resumed in 2019 in a previously unexcavated area of the city, referred to as Regio Cinque, or Region 5. The information from these 2 centuries of excavation, as well as information from the writings of ancient Greek and Roman historians, gives us a vague picture of what the city of Pompeii was like at the time of the eruption. Pliny the Younger documented his observations of the eruption from where he was staying in Misenum, around 50 kilometers or 31 miles from Pompeii by road. The excavations alone, however, tell us in painstaking detail about the last moments of the people of Pompeii, as no one who was there that day survived to document their experience. The little we know about Pompeii before the year 79 mostly comes from the Greek writer Strabo, but also from a small number of excavations that delve beneath the preserved structures from the 1st century CE. The city of Pompeii came under Roman rule in 80 BCE, but was an ally of Rome for years before that. It was said to have been settled in the 8th century BCE by the native people of the area, who were referred to as Oscans. In the 7th century BCE, the Etruscans moved into the area, followed by the Greeks in the 6th century BCE. When the Romans began conquering and assimilating all the people of the area in the 1st century BCE, Pompeii was at first an ally, but later rebelled when they weren't given fair representation in Rome. In 89 BCE, General Sulla quelled the rebellions and made Pompeii an official colony of Rome. The archaeology is less clear-cut than what Strabo has reported, but does agree that the site was occupied by an Etruscan culture which became heavily influenced by Greek culture in the 6th century BCE. Pompeii was generally prosperous due to its position as a port in the Bay of Naples and the fertile volcanic soil that surrounded it, which yielded olives, wine grapes, and woolen cloth from sheep herding. Its primary economic staples were in wine, perfume, and flowers, a salty sauce made of fish entrails called garum, and cloth production, as well as the shipping business. It seems to have functioned as a market town, as indicated by the many murals of shipping goods on the river Sarno, as well as the many tabernae, or taverns, and private homes that included shopfronts, which sold the equivalent of fast food. It wasn't the biggest port in the area, but it seems to have been a busy trade center nonetheless. There were also many hotels conveniently placed near the many gates of the city, around the amphitheater and the forum, and near where the port is thought to have been located. This suggests the city frequently hosted visitors, either merchants, sailors, or shoppers. There was also a large section of town specifically for trade and shopping, called the Macellum. The Roman goddess of love and fertility, Venus, was said to be the patron of the town. She provided for the fertility of the land as well as the people of Pompeii. This is supported by many erotic murals, frescoes, and mosaics found on the interior of both public buildings and private homes. These would have been created to display not only wealth, but also to emulate the wealthy in Rome and therefore show loyalty and maintain social status. In the year 62 or 63, it was recorded that Pompeii suffered heavy damage from a massive earthquake. Seneca the Younger, who wrote at the time of this earthquake, described it in his work De Terremotu, or Concerning Earthquakes. He stated that both Pompeii and Herculaneum suffered heavy damage. In the past, researchers believed that Pompeii never recovered from this earthquake, as parts of it were found in a state of disrepair, in addition to the damage from the volcanic eruption. For example, statuary was missing from areas that would have been meticulously decorated in a normal Roman society, and the marble facing from several building fronts was missing, which suggests these areas and structures were abandoned and then pillaged for building material. Also, only one of the bathhouses seemed to be in working order. More recently, however, archaeologists have found evidence that the statuary and marble were actually salvaged by looters not long after the eruption. One piece of this evidence are the words "house dug" in Latin scrawled on the outside of one of the larger homes. This is likely a marker to other thieves, indicating that the house was already emptied of valuables. Either way, it's possible this earthquake spooked the higher echelon of Pompeian society. There's evidence that many of the larger homes had been renovated to have shop fronts after the earthquake, which suggests they were either vacated by their rich owners, then bought by more enterprising middle-class families, or that the rich opened commercial endeavors to help sustain them in the city, or perhaps pay for the repairs to their homes. This earthquake was likely a preamble to the eruption of Vesuvius 17 years later. Documented references to Mount Vesuvius from the time before the eruption are few, but as it played a large part in the slave revolts of 73 BCE by the well-known figure Spartacus, we do know a little about what it looked like before it erupted. Spartacus and his rebels hid in the cone of the volcano and were besieged by the Roman army there, but managed to escape using the branches of the dense forest that surrounded it to help them flee quickly down its steep sides. Strabo recorded that this dense forest was soon replaced by agriculture, and wrote that the summit had become barren and ash-covered, and described it as flat, which is quite different than what it looks like today with its double peak due to a vast crater at the summit. This is due to the collapse of the original summit crater, which now forms a dish shape called a caldera. What we know about the geological history of Mount Vesuvius has been expanded thanks to research by modern volcanologists and geologists. Vesuvius is a composite or stratovolcano, meaning its shape was formed due to a buildup of many layers of hardened lava, volcanic stones such as pumice, and ash. It's possible it formed due to volcanic activity of a nearby now extinct volcano modernly called Monte Somma. In stratovolcanoes, eruptions occur due to a buildup of magma and trapped water, thanks to the oceanic crust being drawn under or subducted under the continental crust. The water trapped under the continental crust lowers the melting point of the rock in that crust, which in turn lowers its density and causes it to rise up as magma through the layers of the continental crust, absorbing other elements as it goes. The magma then pools when it's blocked by higher density rock. More and more water and gases build up, and eventually the magma bursts through the plug of denser rock, causing an explosive eruption. Vesuvius has had 3 violent explosive eruptions in historical times, and around 7 more before recorded history, as indicated by geological and geophysical research of the rocks in and around the volcano. Each of these larger eruptions has resulted in ash and pumice being projected high into the air and creating ash fallout in the area around the volcano, as well as pyroclastic flow and ground surges, which are superheated, fast-moving dense clouds of gas, ash, and steam. These surges destroy 3 meters, or around 10 feet thick, stone walls. Each eruption of this type has caused devastation in the area, sometimes extending as far as 22 kilometers or 13.5 miles from the volcanic crater. Between 1631 and 1944, Vesuvius had more frequent but less explosive eruptions. Since 1944, it has been in a quiescent state, producing only low-temperature fumaroles, or hot gas and steam emissions of around 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and moderate seismic activity, around 100 earthquakes a year with magnitudes between 0.5 and 3.6 on the Richter scale. It's thought that this long period of dormancy may be the calm before the storm, and that Vesuvius may be due for another explosive eruption. Therefore, 24/7 monitoring of seismic activity is conducted all over the area in hopes to give enough warning for the over 3 million people living in nearby Naples and other towns to flee before the volcano erupts. Now that you know the town and the volcano, we can talk about the eruption and the human toll of this disaster. But before we do, let's pause for a word from our sponsors. Our regular sponsor is Audible.com. Audible can provide you with interesting and engaging audiobooks. In fact, there are over 180,000 of them to choose from, which you can listen to on your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or other MP3 players. MCP listeners can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial of Audible.com by going to www.audibletrial.com/MCP. You can also find this link on our Facebook page and website. If you sign up for the free trial, you get a free audiobook that is yours to keep, even if you cancel the service as soon as you finish downloading it. And the MCP gets the funding it needs to keep bringing morbid history to your ears. So go get your free audiobook on us. Lastly, if you like this podcast, why not sponsor the MCP yourself by becoming a patron on Patreon? Over 30,000 people download this podcast every month, but only around 90 people are supporting us on Patreon. For a mere $1 an episode, that's $2 a month, you can get ad-free episodes, bonus behind-the-scenes info, give your opinion by answering polls, help choose episodes, and get updates on past episodes. For $3 an episode, you get monthly outtake reels. For $5, you get a monthly quiz episode where I quiz my husband on past episodes. For $10, you get a detailed bibliography of all the resources I used while researching each topic. And for $20, you get a bit of miscellaneous morbidity, a short essay on a random morbid topic every month. Previously, we've reviewed horror video games, discussed the medicine of Westeros, and the plague pits of London. All of these rewards aside, your patronage supports the podcast and keeps new episodes coming. I can't keep doing this podcast without you, so go to bit.ly/morbidpatron, that's bit.ly/morbidpatron, to choose your rewards and support the MCP. You'll have my eternal gratitude. And now, back to the podcast. In the year 79 CE, Pompeii was a busy, bustling place of commerce, having survived a massive earthquake. When the eruption of Mount Vesuvius occurred, it's estimated the city had a population of between 12 and 15,000. Thanks to information from both Pliny the Younger and the archaeological record, we have a pretty good estimation of the timeline of the eruption, and know that many people were likely able to flee from the city before the most violent part of the eruption, but thousands were still in the city when it occurred. The date of the eruption has long been thought to be August 24th, 79 CE. This is the date given by Pliny the Younger, who wrote of his observations and those of the people with him around 25 years after the fact. The archaeology, however, suggests a date in late October is more likely, thanks to the recovery of ripe autumn fruits, dried summer fruits, several coins that could not have been minted before September of 79, the warmer attire found on some of the human remains, and more recently a charcoal graffiti found in 2018 that includes the date October 17th. As charcoal is easily rubbed off, it's most likely the eruption occurred soon after this was written. Massimo Ossana, head of the current excavations at Pompeii, believes this suggests the eruption happened around October 24th, meaning that Pliny was a few months off. Still, the sequence of events described by Pliny seems to agree with the archaeological and geological findings from excavations. Pliny noted that there had been an increase in tremors felt in the area of Vesuvius in the days leading up to the eruption. Apparently, tremors were quite common in the area, but these had been particularly rough and frequent. From his location in Misenum, Pliny the Younger observed a cloud of unusual size and appearance in the late afternoon of what he believed to be August 24th. As his uncle, Pliny the Elder, left to rescue a friend from whatever was causing this cloud, it began to rain ash and pumice in Stabiae, 28 kilometers or around 17 miles from Misenum. Friends of Pliny's uncle who lived in Stabiae and escaped told Pliny everything, which is how he was able to record the information. The shoreline of the Bay of Naples was soon reported as being covered in floating pumice, making launching or docking a ship impossible, so escape by water was out of the question. The ash was so thick in the air that people needed lanterns to see anything, and breathing it was painful, so people pulled their clothing up over their faces to try and block it out. Many people fled, but others stayed, hoping it would pass. But the rain of ash and pumice went on through the night, and many people left their homes for the outdoors as houses began to collapse from the weight of the ash on their rooftops. The archaeological findings agree with this stream of events. Archaeology deals in layers or stratigraphy of soil and debris that collect over time when determining the chronology or timeline of a site. In the case of Pompeii, an extensive layer, about 3 meters or 10 feet, of ash and pumice lay directly on top of the ruins of Pompeii and other areas south of Vesuvius. This ash layer is also seen to a lesser extent in Herculaneum, which had only around 20 centimeters or about 8 inches of ash buildup. This layer appears whitish at the bottom or beginning of the ashfall and goes green near the top or end. This shows a change in the chemical composition of the ash as the magma reservoir in the volcano emptied. The layers above this ash fallout tell us more, but first let's go back to Pliny. Pliny tells us that tremors also continued through the night. It was hard to tell when daylight broke, as the air was so thick with ash that it seemed dark as night. In the early hours of the next day, the sea seemed to draw back from the shore. A black cloud appeared at the top of the mountain and descended quickly towards the sea, obscuring all in its path. Fire seemed to be leaping from the sides of Vesuvius, and the smell of sulfur was heavy in the air. Panic rose, and people began to flee in earnest, taking some of their valuables with them. Seeing this black cloud racing down from the mountain, the people of Misenum fled as well, and were soon overtaken by falling ash. The black cloud, however, never reached them. The stratigraphy of Pompeii again agrees that there was a second stage to the eruption. While the ashfall is the first phase, often called the Plinian phase in honor of the death of Pliny the Elder at Stabiae during this part of the eruption, the layer above it in the stratigraphy of Pompeii is that of a ground surge and a pyroclastic flow. In this second phase, a series of nuées ardentes, which is French for glowing cloud and is described as a hot ash avalanche, swept down the south and west flanks of the volcano, covering the region and reaching the outskirts of Misenum, over 30 kilometers or 18.5 miles to the west of the volcano. This is referred to as the Pelean phase, after the 1902 eruption of Mount Pelée in the Caribbean, where this natural phenomenon killed over 28,000 people. These avalanches are preceded by a ground surge, a turbulent cloud of volcanic ash and hot gases, which hangs close to the ground and travels a few seconds ahead of the flow at around 100 kilometers or 62 miles per hour. This thin ground surge layer, about 20 to 30 centimeters or 8 to 12 inches in the stratigraphy of Pompeii, lies on top of the ash and under the pyroclastic flow. While the ground surge layer is thin, it's likely the most destructive part of the eruption. The ground surge layer is mostly fine ash, limestone, dense volcanic fragments of pumice, as well as roof tiles, which were blown off the houses by the surge. These tiles are especially dense at the north gate, which was closest to Vesuvius. The fine ash included in this layer is what preserved the garments and the bodies of the fleeing Pompeians. The size of the pyroclastic deposits in the stratigraphy vary depending on topography, as they tend to collect in valleys and depressions. This layer is 60 centimeters thick, or around 24 inches at the necropolis of Pompeii, which lies on the northwestern edge of the city, and around 180 centimeters, or about 6 feet, at the Vesuvius and Herculaneum gates of the city at the north and northwest. This pyroclastic layer is covered by a second ground surge layer, suggesting a series of these surges and flows hit Pompeii. Herculaneum had a thin ashfall layer, but this was topped by a 20-meter layer of pyroclastic flow, that's 65.5 feet thick. Herculaneum was much closer to Vesuvius, so it took the brunt of the pyroclastic flow, but the wind carried most of the ash toward Pompeii. All of the wood in the city of Herculaneum was instantly carbonized or turned to charcoal. The temperature of the pyroclastic flow would have had to have been around 400 degrees Celsius or 750 degrees Fahrenheit to do this. A final layer of fine ash around 60 to 70 centimeters or 2 to 2.5 feet thick covers the layers of pyroclastic flow at Pompeii. This fine ash layer includes accretionary lapilli, spherical pellets of ash that form when falling ash comes into contact with water droplets from steam or rain. The question we're all thinking now is, what about the people? What happened to them? As I said, the majority of the population likely fled during the ashfall phase of the eruption. This would explain why only around 1,200 individuals have been found during the 2 centuries of excavation. Many of the human remains were found in voids or empty pockets clear of any debris in the stratigraphy. These empty spaces were encapsulated by hardened layers of fine ash. It was Giuseppe Fiorelli in the 1860s who first wondered if the strange voids were something more. In order to find out, he poured plaster into one of these voids, let it dry, then broke away the hardened ash layer from the plaster. To his surprise, the plaster had formed an almost perfect shape of a person, complete with details like eyes, a mouth, and the shape of clothing. He immediately realized that the ash, and now the plaster, had captured the person's position as they lay dying. Dozens of casts of men, women, and children were made. They drew the morbid fascination of the world almost immediately, and still do so today. The images draw us to them not just because they expose the fragility of human existence, but also because they put us in almost immediate contact with the ancient people of our world. The casts have become the iconic symbols of the human toll of the eruption of Vesuvius. They make all who see them speculate about the lives they represent, what the person was feeling and seeing when they died. The images are quite haunting, as they portray someone who died thousands of years ago, but looks as if they are still dying right in front of our eyes. Many of these individuals were found inside homes or buildings. It appears they were trying to take refuge from the ash and the surge. Not only people have been found, the remains of several dogs have also been recovered. Previously, researchers thought that the ashfall suffocated the people left in the city. Why else would their bodies be encased in ash? However, new research that was published in 2018 suggests it was the pyroclastic surge that killed most of the victims of Vesuvius. Please note the next section contains graphic descriptions. New excavations on Herculaneum revealed about 300 people who took refuge in 12 waterfront chambers, possibly boathouses. Around half of these individuals had casts made from their remains, while 140 of these individuals were recovered and their skeletons analyzed for cause of death, and to study the effect of heat on the human body using bioanthropological techniques. Pyroclastic surges, as I said, are clouds of fine ash, superheated steam, and volcanic gases. They are intensely hot, between 200 and 500 degrees Celsius or 400 to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, and move incredibly fast, between 100 and 300 kilometers or 62 and 186 miles per hour. Exposure to this type of environment leaves no chance of survival. Herculaneum was the first city hit by one of these surges, and Pompeii followed shortly after. The individuals inside the boathouse were preserved in their last vital positions. In other words, they appear as if frozen at the exact moment of their deaths. Usually, when a body is exposed to heat, the muscles contract, drawing the person into the fetal position, and the spine hyperextends, both of which are involuntary movements of the body trying to protect itself. However, the individuals in the boathouses do not show this contraction. They still appear to be in their last lifelike stance. This suggests they were instantly killed by the extreme high temperature of the surge. Their bodies had no time to involuntarily react. The musculature was gone before it could contract. These skeletons also reveal an unusual red to black mineral residue that encrusts the bones and is even found inside the skulls of the individuals and in the ash below their bodies. When tested, it was revealed that this residue was heavy in iron. The only things that can cause this type of residue are when metal is superheated or blood is burned away. The dark staining was also seen inside the skull, especially on the side that faced the doorway of the boathouses where the surge would have entered from. This suggests that the extreme heat of the surge rapidly vaporized the body fluids and soft tissues of these individuals, inside and out. This theory is also supported by the skull traumas observed in many of the individuals. These traumas include clear-cut fractures in the skull that radiate from several points. These skulls are also filled with ash. This combination indicates that the individuals suffered a massive heat-induced hemorrhage, a rise in the pressure inside the skull resulting in an explosive fracture. Almost immediately after this fracture, the brain was replaced with ash. This type of injury is not seen in Pompeii, which suggests that while still intensely hot, the pyroclastic surge had cooled somewhat by the time it reached the city. The victims in Pompeii showed the signs of heat-induced muscle contraction, suggesting that their bodies survived the heat long enough to contract their muscles. The victims in both towns, however, would have died immediately before they were even conscious of the surge hitting them. This is still a theory, however. It's possible the people suffocated first, and then the heat took their bodies. We will likely never know for sure, as it's difficult to observe and research this process safely. Around 400 individuals have been found in the ash layer, likely dying of injury from collapsing buildings or suffocation, while around 700 have been found in the pyroclastic surge layer. Other objects were carbonized immediately in the heat. This seems to have happened more in Herculaneum, again due to the more intense heat that swept over the town. Over 30 bakeries have been discovered in Pompeii, many found with bread still in the stone ovens, forgotten during the panic, and perfectly preserved by the ash and the heat. Jars of food were found on the marble counters of many of the taverns, filled with lentils, chickpeas, dates, olives, and almonds. Flowers, tools, and pots and pans have also been recovered from many houses. The roots of trees and plants left voids similar to those of the people in many gardens, giving us a picture of what Roman families grew at home. Hundreds of amphora, tall earthen jars, have been found with their contents still inscribed on the outside, as well as the name of the merchant or shipper in charge of them. These contained wine, garum, and olive oil, confirmed by the residue left inside them. Graffiti on the outsides of houses has also been preserved and shows market prices, messages to friends, and even gossip. Many of the valuables carried by the individuals trying to flee were preserved as well. These included lanterns, coins, small stone figurines, and house keys. It seems many hoped they would be able to return to their homes. This is a reminder that Pompeii was not preserved on a regular day. People had almost an entire day of warning thanks to the tremors and the ashfall, and therefore most had packed up and left before the pyroclastic surge hit. This leaves us with a picture of a town in crisis, rather than one going about business as usual. This is also why many of the homes seemed sparsely furnished upon excavation. The people must have taken much of their furniture with them in carts when they left. Looting soon after the eruption also likely has something to do with the lack of treasure-type objects such as statuary. The view we get of Pompeii from all that has been preserved is a complicated one. We have gleaned a huge amount of information from what has been excavated, but still know very little about the people and their daily lives. It's true that Pompeii offers a more detailed glimpse at the Roman world than any other archaeological site, but there are still details missing and questions left unanswered. This air of mystery, contrasted with the very detailed, very visible knowledge of how the people of Pompeii died, is what draws out the curiosity in us. The Morbid Curiosity podcast was produced by H. Lloyd. If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a morbid topic for me to talk about, you can tweet the show at Morbid Podcast or find us on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast. If you like the show, please share us on social media. And please, please, please give us a rating on iTunes. Your shares and ratings help us reach new listeners and expand this wonderfully creepy community. Thank you to everyone who commented, suggested topics, shared MCP posts, liked or followed the MCP on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and gave us ratings on iTunes. People like Robin W., Kate, Pool Water and Sunshine, Siren Song Stitchery, Whimsykimmy, Canhens, Steven 559, Noelle, Derby Girl, Bubba's Girl Forever, Christy, I'm Sleepless, Gimme True Crime, Kismet Sunshine, Margot Loves Tomcat, Possum Gator 371, Novice Lunatic, Katie and Eric, Kelly, Grangees GHI, Kimberly, Francis, Stephanie, Hannah, Lauren, and Chronometrist all have my eternal gratitude for becoming patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much. Because of you, the listeners, our creepy community is growing, especially on Facebook, so head over there to engage with other listeners, discuss episodes and news articles, and share your own creepy stories and cute pet pictures. The MCP is part of a wider creepy community known as the Belfry Podcast Network. Check out the other shows on the Belfry Network at www.thebelfry.rip. As I said before, if you really like the MCP, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You can also give one-time donations by going to our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com, and clicking the donate button. On our website, you can also find links to all our social media and sponsors, and other ways to contact us. If you'd rather contact us by mail, this address is also listed on the website. Another way to help the show is by going to our Amazon wish list at bit.ly/morbidwishlist. Any purchases from this list are greatly appreciated. We are eternally grateful for your support. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thanks for listening.